Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to finish off today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. If you'd like to submit your own special selection, you can find a link to do so in the description below. Today's special selection comes at us from Will, Gates of Delirium by Yes. No comments or context needed. 100% agree with that. But at this point in time, I know what I'm getting into when it comes to Yes, and you really should just let me dive in and see what's going on. From what I understand, this is the third out of four major epics from classic Yes. We've done Close to the Edge. We've done this is Gates of Delirium. We did Close to the Edge and Awaken. And the next one is The Revealing Science of God. That'll be the fourth one. So if someone wants to request that one, go ahead and do it. It's the only one missing from this quadrilogy of classic Yes epics. But right now we're going to be talking about Gates of Delirium. So let's get into it. Very different. Okay. Every time I think we're going to move on to the next section. Okay. Playing around with some volume dynamics. It's a very fuzzy texture to everything. It sounds like every instrument is clipping. It's an interesting choice that I don't remember from the previous Yes songs, which have been very clearly or cleanly produced. Yeah. It sounded like we had a retardando going on, but the drums weren't slowing down. The whole band was though. Very wide on those vocals there. Very interesting placement of the vocals. And it's such a wide production too. We've got really nice texture layering there with the, like, what was that, the organ and the trumpet? Yeah, nice little triplet feel there to contrast the other chord pulse we've been feeling. That was very cinematic. This is a really interesting time field too. Yeah, so I think that was shifting between 8 and 9. Which could be 4/4 and then 4/4 with an extra 8th note on it. Some interesting jazzy riffs going on in here. There's that fuzz again. This is an interesting mix. Very bass heavy too. I'm not a fan yet. Yeah, a few of those instruments again, it feels like they're clipping. Yeah, that's a fun inversion of the idea, bringing it from the bass to the higher range. What's with that hi-hat being so centered and close and loud? They're also playing around a lot with noise, which is interesting. noise and dissonance and samples, if you could call them that, given the time period. Sounds like people whistling or cheering way in the background. Very wide harmony. An uncharacteristically very rough transition. I like the funky bass. Ooh. So that previous section just reminded me a lot of new avant-garde electronic music, which is interesting. Lots of interesting things going on. And we brought back this bass idea. Oh, it looks like we rented the same idea. Shifted to a 5, but we're still heavily using these industrial metallic samples. Really interesting rhythmic ideas, both clashing and supporting each other. Nice lick. We're in 11-4 right now. I think this is the most coherent the song's been in a while. The bass and the guitar line are working well within each other, allowing each other to play their roles while the drums are laying down the rhythmic structure. Classic Yes experimentation. Very angelic this point. And this is going to be the most cohesive point of the song so far.
Long ago, set it to rhyme. Soon, oh soon, the light ours to shape for all time. Ours the right.
Yeah, oh man, I love the way that he modifies his inflections and delivers the notes. The delay here is interesting because it almost makes it feel out of time. Huh. A lot of ambiguity there in that ending. I'm not I'm not sure it resolved, which we heard uh we heard chord progressions up to that point with nice resolutions to them creating nice circulatory progressions. So it's interesting that they didn't just take that. They went out of their way to ensure it did not feel resolved. Not to mention the fact that we kept getting these half step rises, I think it was, in the higher string notes. And I was really waiting for the lower end strings to help resolve, or maybe that's piano, I don't remember, uh, resolving into where it was going. And they were eventually going to meet at a point of resolution together while they were both moving in different directions. And I don't think that happened. At best, it might have been a half resolution where most of the note relationships do reach a point of resolution, but one of them provides a bit of instability, which might have led to that sort of ambiguity there at the end. But very unexpected. Very, very unexpected. Um, so I know this song came in between Close to the Edge and Awaken. Close to the Edge was 72, this was 74, and Awaken was 77. And I was kind of thinking I would hear a mix between the two, sort of how their style has evolved over time. And I didn't get that. It seems it seems as though that Yes does not evolve linearly. That's a weird word to say. They sort of branch out and do different ideas at different times, and they mature their craft in a multifaceted manner instead of maturing it in layers. Like, first we're going to learn this, and then our next album is going to be this, and our next album is going to be this, and getting progressively better in a linear fashion. Instead, they seem to be reaching out and basically maturing and expanding their craft of experimentation, and experimentation can really develop in any number of ways. And this song experiments on different ideas than the other two did, although I can certainly hear some of what they learned here in Awaken, specifically the opening. I can hear how they took some of the ideas here and rounded off the harsher aspects and cleaned it up and took what they learned here and turned it into that bustling, chaotic cityscape section that Awaken begins with. It is a, at the time I called it, completely chaotic, difficult to follow, noisy. No, I had no idea what was in store for me. That was actually a very refined attempt at doing something that we heard here. And this is a very rough, I don't want to say rough, it's different. As far as cleanliness, I think this is a rougher approach, but it achieves a different texture than what they were going for in Awaken. So I don't want to say that this is sort of like a rough draft and they refined it. They refined it? Refound it? That's not a real word. They refined it for Awaken. It's a similar technique done in two different ways. At least that's how I'm feeling this one to be. Um, and what I mean by that, so the first half of this song, minus the intro, is chaos. Pure chaos. It is everywhere. It is in different rhythmic structures, opposing rhythmic structures. It's in opposing melodic lines. It's in counterpoints that are. I don't even know if technically I can call them a counterpoint because counterpoints, I believe by definition, at least in some measure, work to support each other, the two melody lines. This just seemed to be two melody lines from two different sections, or maybe two different songs that were played simultaneously, had very little to do with each other, and were stepping on each other's toes more than anything else. I suppose, in a more traditional term, if this is indeed still counterpoint, if it is just the mere existence of multiple melody lines, then this would be what would traditionally be called a bad or a rough type of, or a rough implementation of counterpoint. There are very harsh transitions, which something I've talked about before, both Close to the Edge and Awaken, as well as a couple of their non-epics, is that yes, at least to me, is known for fantastic transitions between ideas. They know how to make a song flow. The fact that so many of these sections do not flow together is a very intentional decision on their part to be made to achieve a specific idea. The mix, the intro and the last 7 minutes or so, they are, at least to me, mixed very well. They're very cleanly mixed. The instruments are all put at the proper volume. They're all EQ'd properly. Placement is something we're going to talk about later. They have a very interesting way to play sounds, and I think it has something to do with the technology at the time. We'll get into that later, though. Um, but yeah, everything just seems to be, everything has a place and it's in its place, and it's, all the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted. It sounds fine. But there's a lot of stuff in the middle, or in that first 15 minutes, I guess, that don't. I mentioned multiple times that there's elements of clipping. A lot of this happened on the bass instruments, whether that's a cello or the bass kick, low floor toms, the bass guitar, any sort of lower range instrument in this opening 15 minutes or so was prone to clipping. And clipping is when you play above the volume to the fact that, or to the point where you erase some of the top end of the, or even more of the top end, depending on how much you're clipping. The characteristic of the sound, the instrument, the tone, the timbre. You're cutting away some of its unique identifying aspects and replacing it with crackles, right? Pops and crackles. It's when something's too loud as an input. That happened all the time. The bass was just boosted beyond anywhere it should have been. And in some sections, it even had a sort of blown out sound to it, especially the bass guitar. It felt, instead of having a nice roundness to it, it felt like it had been inverted, and split open and just messy. Um, and I don't. It took me a while to understand what was going on because, coming into it, there's a lot of oddities. There's the mix is weird. Where instruments are placed in the sound sphere are weird. We don't have these strong connections between ideas. The bass is getting blasted and blown out. There's clipping problems. There's chaos. The cleanliness of the clutter, which is an interesting thing to go about. We've listened to some noisy songs before, both from Yes and from other bands. And one thing that I've always talked about that I personally enjoy, it doesn't have to be this way. There are bands that go for an ultra cluttered sound. But one of the things that I enjoy in styles like this is when you have so many layers that the production really comes into play, and the producer has a lot of work to do to make it sound like it's not a cluttered mess. There may be 15 instruments playing. Some of them may be stepping on each other's toes a little bit as far as rhythmic placing or note wise, or whatever, stealing spotlight and stuff like that. But as long as the production is handled well and every instrument is given its space, it's going to sound fine. It's going to sound as it's intended. It's still going to be chaos, but it's going to sound like controlled chaos. And this is the opposite of that. There are a lot of sections in here that are pure chaos. It's still controlled to the extent that it was composed and performed to a T the way that they wanted it, and then produced in a specific manner as well. But because of the messiness in the bass, because we have the clipping and the blown out aspect, it becomes muddy and it muddies up everything that's around it that it touches. Um, I mentioned several times that there's a lot of width going on. That instruments are just way pan to the left, way pan to the right. There were a couple of instances also where everything just kind of feels cluttered together in the center, like nothing was given its own space. It was just lumped together in one panning, and it happens to be center in most of these situations. And if this were my first introduction to the band, I would probably approach a lot of this negatively. And in fact, I think the words I'm choosing and how I'm going about talking about it probably does still carry a negative connotation to it. It is not something that I think sounds good. In fact, to me, it's a lot of production mistakes as far as my personal tastes in music. I'm not saying that lo-fi or cluttered or noisy or uh, muddy production is a bad way to produce. As always, production is just much like composition, it's a set of tools in a toolbox, and how you use them is more important than following rules of use. You can always achieve interesting things by going against the grain or tossing the book out entirely and making your own rules. Um, so coming into this, though, there's just a lot of things in here that, at least to me, are red flags of poor production. Or at least a misunderstanding of how to produce the section, because in contrast, we do have the opening and final 7 minutes, which are cleaner produced, but also less cluttered sections. It could tell me that there is some inexperience in the hands of the producer, that maybe he understood how to compose, or how to produce a more traditionally structured song with less layers and less moving components, but the center was a bit too much for him, bit off more than he could chew. And like I said, if this is my first time coming into Yes, that might be what I'd be talking about right now. But having listened to what came before it, with Closer to the Edge, or Close to the Edge, and what comes after it, I know that that's not the case. Everything in here was done intentionally. It is an intentionally disruptive 15 or so minutes of the song. And so my brain starts asking, why? What is the purpose of it? It was done on purpose. Why was it done on purpose? And I don't know yet. I think that answer is going to be revealed to me when I dig into the lyrics. Unlike Awaken, which took me on a journey all by itself. part of that, like I mentioned, was the album art, which had already put the idea of towering skyscrapers into my mind, which put me into a cityscape. So the noisy bustling of the first act of that song already had me in that mindset. This one, however, the album art's not really putting me into any mindset. The title of the song, though, does introduce some interesting ideas. We have the Gates of Delirium. And I want to look up the definition of delirium just so I know I'm on the right page here. Because I believe delirium is a state of being delirious. This states that delirium is an organically caused decline from a previous baseline mental functioning that develops over a short period of time, typically hours to days. So, it is a decline in mental functioning, just to sum that down. So, the gates of delirium would be the doorway into a lack of mental function. On the surface, I feel that. This song definitely feels like cognitive breakdown. We can even hear it early on, where before we really get into some of the harsher transitions and really discombobulated sections of the song, we are slowly introduced to these ideas. The beginning of the song is very consonant, very harmonious. We get into the first section with vocals. We're still in 4/4. I think everything's still neatly produced. There's some interesting ideas as far as placement go, but again, we're going to talk about that later. I think just has to do with the time and technology. But for the most part, everything fits together. And the next section after this is when the bass comes in, and that's when we start seeing the blown out bass with the clipping. And this is the beginning of the descent. And we slowly get more and more chaotic. Every new section becomes more chaotic. The transition between the sections become less flowy and more instantaneous, more disruptive. And I'm curious then what the end represents, because this is also the second part of the lyrics. We have the intro lyrics, which was maybe 2 minutes worth with a lot of space between them. I'd say maybe 3 stanzas tops. There really was not a lot going on lyrically in this song. A lot. This basically is an instrumental with a couple of pockets of vocals in it. And then we have the angelic vocals at the end. And that is an entirely different part of the song. And it is in stark contrast to what we had seen before. It is not a slow rising back up into consonance. It is an immediate one. We go from the chaos immediately into this angelic uplifting playing. So I'm really curious how the lyrics go into that and sort of explain or possibly give me some ideas into what's going on thematically there. But I do want to contrast. Well, I think I already did, contrasting the noisy bits of this song versus the noisy stuff at the beginning of Awaken. And I think a lot of it really has to deal with, like I said, they're going for different vibes. And what I mean by that is this one was going for disruption, right? And I think that's different than chaos. We can use chaotic elements to create disruption, right? We can use multiple melody lines so that they're clashing. It's not so much the fact that there are multiple melody lines here, it's that they are clashing. We can make this clash with any tool in the toolbox. They specifically chose melody. The same thing goes with playing notes outside of a key, or tempo shifts, or volume dynamics. We saw that at the end of the chaotic part, moving into the final section, I think, or it was the outro coming out of the final section. When it felt like the producer had the volume knob, the master volume knob, and they were holding out these notes, and there were like cymbal hits on downstrokes, and just kind of turned the volume up down and bring it back up and then coming back down. And it felt like the song was still going on, but the volume was fluctuating. Um, so there's lots of ways to create disruption, but I think that was the core thing here. I, initially felt that it was just bad, not bad, different or dissonant production elements and composition elements, but it really isn't about the noise. It isn't about things being interesting or odd or clashing. Well, it is about the clashing because it's about the destruction here. It's about having a bunch of things that don't make sense together. And the chaos just happens to be one of the ways they do that. And they actually utilize the chaos quite often in it, but it is not the only tool. And like I said, I do think that this clashing of ideas is this musical representation of a state of delirium, of being actually delirious, mentally, medically delirious. And it's an interesting idea. Now, again, I haven't read the lyrics yet. I'm basing that entirely off the song title, but yeah, I'm not sure I enjoyed this song as much musically because of that. Like I mentioned, I enjoy cleaner mixes, cleaner transitions. I like what Yes has done in their more consonant tracks. But right now, I do have an I do have an appreciation for the art that they have created with this song. Now, I mentioned I wanted to talk about something later, and I don't remember what it is. Oh, yeah. Instrument placement. So this is something I thought about while we were listening to the song, that there were a lot of sections where the placements were odd or interesting. And the more I thought about it, it really was that we either had a center placement or hard panned. We didn't really have anything middle of the way, which seems to just be, well, it's very different from what I understand about modern production. There are some cases where we want to do a 100% pan, but as far as my understanding and learning of production goes, that's not usually the best way to go about it. You usually still want a little bit in the middle to cover that gap, right? I don't remember what band we were talking about doing this, but spatialness, having space between your instruments and how much space you want that to be. And this is one of the ways to ensure that is horizontally between your center and your left and right pan, is to only pan a percentage rather than 100% panning, which would give you that hard pan only on the one side. You do like a 50 or 60% pan. So it's mostly on the side. That's still where you're going to hear it from, but there's still a little bit of overlap in that gap between it and the center. And you do that on both sides, and you're going to cover a wide range, even if you have two different instruments or two different lines. Having that little bit of overlap is going to make it so that they feel connected while still having the space, that separation between them. And here, like I said, I'm getting this 100% on the side or 100% in the center. And I wonder how much of that has to do with the time. I had mentioned this came out in 74. I don't know if stereo was out actually, I think stereo was out at the time, because when we talked about Beach Boys, that was 66 for Sloop John B, I think it was, and we had begun discussing how I was reading that stereo was just coming out, and that some bands were playing around and experimenting with stereo, and other producers were not happy with it at all because it took control away from them. They no longer had control of where speakers would be, and if somebody placed their speakers, one completely to the right and one behind you, it's going to completely change the way that the song sounds, and producers weren't happy with that at the time. But that made me think, we have these left and right speakers. I don't know if audio systems were doing center channels at the time. I don't know if audio systems do center channels now. I'm not an audio tech geek. Um, but thinking about how you would go about producing music for two speakers makes me think that you would either want it in one specifically or both of them as a center, and how that's very different from modern day, which I wonder if producers are specifically producing for headphones. I don't know. I mean, I kind of wager most music is listened to in headphones and usually probably cheaper headphones. Um, Even expensive cheap headphones. I'm not going to get into that, but whatever. And it has to be in producers' minds, especially when we listen to pop and hip hop. Everybody has AirPods in, whether they're at work or at the grocery store or jogging. I think people primarily listen to music, especially when we look at younger generations, on headphones. So it makes sense to mix music and produce music and place instruments spatially specifically for people who are going to be listening to speakers that are right next to their ears, which is going to be a very different listening experience than, true speakers sitting out in front of you, placed in a room. And how that might change the way that stuff gets produced. I don't know. But that's where my brain was going when I was thinking about how everything was hard panned here. Part of it also is just going to be that it was at least semi new at the time. And much like a lot of the other experimentation production wise, that I attribute to them with the panning and the volume, and they're always experimenting with ways of how the music sounds. Not necessarily, I mean, they experiment with the music itself, yes, but they also seem to be on the forefront of experimenting with musical technology as well. And it could have just been their way of experimenting with stereo. What if on this time we did these hard pans? I don't know. But it is something that got me thinking. And if anybody has any insight into the history of mixing for speakers versus headphones, and if modern producers do target headphones, let me know in the comments because I am getting a little curious about that now as I continue to talk about it. Um, so yeah, the spatialness of where the instruments are is something that stood out to me as well in this track. I think this is where we're going to dive into some lyrics, and I'm going to try to tie that into what I got out of the music and see if we can put together this two-act song, and see if I can figure out what all is going on here and how themes line up. Okay, I was a little off on this. Um, I wonder if there's an alternative definition of delirium, or if maybe that's some sort of metaphorical idea here. Um, but it seems to be about a war. I, I actually double checked because I thought I might have clicked on the wrong set of lyrics, but it appears the Gates of Delirium is about almost an endless war, possibly. And there's a lot more lyrics than I thought. But yeah, I don't really see anything metaphorical here. There is some really beautiful writing. Um, not too many metaphors, I would say. It's just the word selection and how the words flow that I think is done very well. But yeah, it looks like the first two sections of singing are about fighting, going through a war and killing people and kind of reveling in it in some aspects. But it looks like the final bit of the song is just a repeated mantra. Says, "Soon, oh soon the light, pass within and soothe this endless night, and wait here for you, our reason to be here." And I'm not. The idea of the light. There's actually a couple changes. It repeats, "Soon and oh soon the time, not light. All we move to gain will reach and calm. Our heart is open, our reason to be here." And the final repetition, so this is the actual repetition here. There are minor variations, but the foundation's the same, although we do see a full repetition here in the final final stanza. It says, "Soon, oh soon the light, ours to shape for all time, ours the right. The sun will lead us, our reason to be here." It seems to be talking about soothing, which is in massive contrast to bringing pain through fighting. Light, which is a huge difference than some of the Negative elements that we've seen previously, talking about the devil's sermon and poison and darkness. Having this element of light is a drastic contrast to that. Um, says we will reach calm, and the sun will lead us. Our reason to be here. It almost seems like this is something in contrast, almost like a call to peace, possibly. And the only reason I think that, like, I'm not really getting peace out of it too much, just that it's using words that are very contrasty to what we had just talked about with all the chaos, and anger and brutality and the battle. And the opposite of battle is peace. So that's really the only reason I'm seeing into it. But it's interesting. Well, I mean, it's also paired with the music at the time, which is very angelic, very calming and soothing. So it makes sense that that would musically it's in stark contrast. So lyrically it should also be too. So yeah, I think I'm pretty good on that. It is a call to peace after seeing all the combat, and actually that recontextualizes a lot of the musical chaos. I had mentioned that it's based off of the title of the song that it's a descent into a loss of mental facilities, but also a lot of the clashing elements, the chaos. I mentioned a lot of it was two opposing forces trying to, vie for the same portion of the song. It was about the clashing of elements, I don't remember the word I used, but yeah, so that actually fits here as well. It works in both. I gotta look this up because I am so curious if there's another definition for delirium. It doesn't look like it though. I am curious then what Yes meant by that. Unless they're saying that war a is the beginnings of being delirious, of having that. Well, no, because I was gonna say it'd be a type of losing of mental facility because you become razor focused and tunnel vision on the war that you don't think about repercussions or anything like that. But that's not a loss of mental facility. That's more just tunnel vision. It's missing the larger picture for what's happening right now. So yeah, I'm really curious about the title now. So there's another thing if you have any information into what the title means in relationship to this concept here. But I think they did a fantastic job. Once again, they found a way, much like in Awaken, to take a concept, a visualization, which in Awaken would be a bustling city, and in here would be an endless war, and found a way to inject that into the music so that just by listening to it, you can understand what's going on, even if you didn't pick up any of the lyrics. I had already felt this duality of multiple ideas trying to exist simultaneously in a very disruptive or violent fashion. That is baked into the song. That is a huge aspect that I pulled out without even knowing. I even approached it from the wrong direction, thinking it had to do with a loss of mental function. And like I said, it still does work in that light. So I'm real curious about that. But that's one of the big takeaways I have with Yes, is that I don't know that they are always strong composers in a traditional sense. I don't know that everything they do always works. But what I do know is that they are masters at injecting themes and visual ideas into a sonic landscape and and telling a story through music. And at least on a larger picture, the songs always deliver on that. There might be some nitpicks or nuances that I'm like, oh, this section didn't specifically work. Or, I didn't know how this part might attribute to the larger story they're telling. But at the end of the day, instead of looking at the micro and you look at the whole song, the sum of the parts, they always deliver on this. It is just phenomenal how they can paint a picture with music. And that's my big takeaway on all of this, and that's probably what I'm going to be looking for if we check out that other one, the science one. What was that? The Revealing Science of God, the fourth big classic Yes epic. That's what I'll be looking for. What kind of story am I being told here? What journey am I being taken on? Because to me, that's what Yes is, especially with these longer epics, is they're musical storytellers. They tell stories, they paint pictures with music, and I think they're just phenomenal at it. Those are my thoughts, though, on Yes is the Gates of Delirium. This is where you guys come in. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you thought about this one. Let me know if you think I'm close on any of my readings. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, if you have, any other information you like to add or context or your personal experience with this song, go ahead and let me know. I always love reading about the different interpretations that people have when it comes to Yes. The comments from Close to the Edge and Awaken are probably in the top of my favorite videos to read comments for, just because Yes seems to mean different people or different things to different people, and a lot of different things to different people. Their stories and the music that they play speaks to different people differently. And I absolutely love reading other perspectives and seeing how other people are interacting with the art that they're making. Above the comment section, there's a description box, and in there is a link for Linktree. It'll take you to this menu right here. It has everything related to the channel. You can join a Discord community, follow me on Twitter, support the channel through Patreon, submit your own special selection, pick up some merch, a bunch of other stuff in there as well. Go ahead and check it out. Above the description box, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll have our penultimate groovy song for the Groove Week, and we'll look at our last special selection for the week. Until next time, remember to be critical but not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.